So like the day after I make a video explaining how, WWE has no momentum going on the road to WrestleMania and it's going to be a big disaster, WWE put out the most eventful, surprising, and most unhinged episode of Monday Night Raw. It feels like there's been for a long time. Nice one, guys, thank you. I look like an idiot now. Unless I make a video praising the product as well as one's criticising it, playing both sides so that I always come out on top. It's genius. I am invincible. No, this isn't going to be totally a positive video about WWE's product, but it's not going to be a totally negative one either, because honestly, I found this week's Raw to at least show some impetus and at least have some kind of creative spirit behind it in order to try and make something fresh and quite exciting down the line, and that is something that I found completely lacking recently in terms of, the Royal Rumble and Elimination Chamber, so at least this feels like maybe it could be a step in the right direction. And when I say an unhinged episode of Raw, I mean truly unhinged. Where do we even begin? We had an ambush, an abduction, an unmasking, a Grand Theft Auto, a title change, the mocking of a deceased parent. But no, this was not an Attitude Era Raw. This was a 2026 Monday Night Raw episode. But I'll get the overall criticism out of the way first, which was that yes, this may have felt in certain segments like an unhinged kind of Attitude Era, very controversial Raw at times, but it's still at heart a modern Netflix-era episode of Raw, by which I mean the pace was very slow, of course. Also, this was about a 2-hour, 20-minute episode of Raw, and we had just 4 wrestling matches. And I think when you add the time of each match together, it actually comes in at half an hour total, and that's without taking into account any of the time where it was an ad break, essentially. Watching Raw these days can feel like a bit of a slog. I don't know if that's just because I'm from the UK and we are maybe not as attuned here to how many commercials there are compared to our friends across the pond, but it does feel like a lot since this Netflix deal began. My point is, it's not enough wrestling for a wrestling show. But if you're gonna pack your wrestling show with a lot of non-wrestling segments, at least make those non-wrestling segments memorable for one reason or another. And oh boy, they did that this week. I guess I'll start with CM Punk and Roman Reigns and their segment, given that it is set to be one of the main events of WrestleMania weekend. Now basically, I said in my last video about this feud that the fact that WWE switched away from Roman versus Cody, their initial plan, seemingly, and now it's Roman versus Punk, I said that basically that has put them in quite a tricky spot. Because now the question is, how well can they disguise the fact that this feud is kind of built on very little as we head into WrestleMania? And I did also say that, Punk and Roman are such charismatic individuals and such big stars and such great talkers on the mic that they'll probably give it a really good go of disguising it. And wouldn't you know it? That has happened, yes. If you didn't see what happened, after a war of words in this week's show closing segment at the end of Raw, Punk got the last line in. He took offense to Roman, claiming that, Roman said, "I'm going to retire you, Punk. You're washed up. You're no match for me at WrestleMania." Punk said, "You're going to retire me? No, I'm going to bury you." Which, a wrestling term, bit insidery, to bury an opponent, to make them look bad deliberately. But it can work in kayfabe as well, definitely. It works both ways. But then Punk said, and I quote, "I'm going to bury you next to your father." And then he left the ring, and his music hit, and that was the end of... that was the end. Oh no. So yeah, that line does inject a lot of hatred and animosity immediately into a feud that kind of needed it. And it's done it a lot more quickly than the previous themes of "Oh, you're never here, you're part-time," and "Oh, you never wanted me to be in the Shield, you're so mean." No, this line will do it. But on the other hand, it did seem a little bit out of nowhere, didn't it? How does this really make sense in storyline? I guess we could say, perhaps, that Punk was so offended by the tweet that Roman put out recently, let's flash that up on screen now, that he was so offended by this that now he's going to take things really low and, offensive and personal. And that could well be the justification they go with in storyline moving forwards. I will say, it does feel like a little bit of a shortcut, a little bit lacking in substance, but there's a long way to go. We'll see how it gets fleshed out. What I will say is that if these two lads stand across the ring from each other at WrestleMania and the bell rings and they do a lockup, I will be furious. But then again, there's other places this could go, this line, where it could end up making more sense than just a seeming escalation out of nowhere. Like, for example, this could offend other members of the family, which would cause Punk trouble for himself, maybe, in the build to WrestleMania, especially as he was so confident in the promo that Roman is now alone with none of his family around him, and Roman can't win big matches without their help. So that would be thematically appropriate, I guess. Or maybe, and I think this is my preferred option of those two that I've just suggested, maybe this is going to be the seed of an eventual CM Punk heel turn, perhaps. Because I don't think Punk's winning at WrestleMania. I don't think many people actually do think that Punk's retaining that title. And if he wasn't before he said this line, he certainly can't be now, right? So then where does that leave Punk after WrestleMania when he is no longer World Heavyweight Champion? Where does his story go next? Well, a heel turn would be one answer, I suppose. And God, CM Punk over the years has proven that he is just as effective a heel as he is a babyface, of course. And I would like it. I definitely would like to see it. Because Punk kind of warned us about this when he first came back to WWE. You know, I'm not here to make friends. But then he's been very gracious by CM Punk's standards, by the standards of the CM Punk character. He's actually been very well behaved, so maybe a heel turn would be quite interesting. I've been screaming for one in the case of Cody Rhodes, but I'd take one in the case of Punk as well. You could even say there's a little bit more room for a heel on the Raw side of things as well, now that Seth Rollins, who was until recently a major heel on the brand, he's basically a babyface now, isn't he? So Punk could definitely step into that vacancy. Yes, who would have thought it? One of the best talkers in wrestling history has successfully talked me into being more interested in his feud than I was just a couple of days ago. I could never have possibly seen that coming. But it is very important now that WWE back up this kind of intensity out of nowhere with, you know, intensity of its own in terms of the booking and in terms of the way the match itself at WrestleMania is agented. And this can all be very good. What's next to talk about? I guess the next biggest talking point, it's probably the Liv Morgan heel promo. Okay, so if you haven't been following this feud, recently the Women's World Champion, Stephanie Vaquer, she made her challenger, the Rumble winner, Liv Morgan, she made her very upset by tearing into Liv verbally and saying, you know, you've had everything handed to you throughout your career, but I've had to fight and claw for everything. I've walked through hell and come out the other side, and that's made me strong, and that's part of the reason that I'm such a great champion and so much better than you, Liv. And Liv this week has basically kind of said the same promo back to Stephanie, but from the opposite point of view. So Liv said, yes, you're right, I am more privileged than you, and it's because I'm a star. I got signed in my first ever WWE tryout. I didn't have to fight and scratch and claw like you did, because look at me, I'm Liv Morgan. I've been given the treatment that I fully deserve. Great heel promo. And if that was all that she'd said, I'd be like, wow, this is awesome. This is really effective, because not only does it set two characters apart and the face is being a face and the heel is being a heel, but also it touches upon themes that are often quite unexplored in the very unique modern landscape of WWE, where you've got a whole mixture of people from different training backgrounds. So this would have been a great feud in terms of like the hand-picked, performance-centered, WWE-trained superstar versus the world-travelled, well-respected, kind of more indie worker's worker. But Liv didn't just say that, did she? She said another thing as well. Liv said that Stephanie grew up in a mud hut and started wrestling in a flea-infested ring. Who wrote that? Why did we need to include that? Are they not aware of the climate currently out there, the socio-political climate? It felt like a very unwise thing to put on your show, in my opinion. And look, I know Liv's the bad guy, and bad guys in fiction say bad things sometimes. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I do think that this was working anyway without having to kind of throw that detail in there. And I also worry that it gives away the result of the WrestleMania match, because Stephanie's not losing now, right? They wouldn't just book the heel to win the match after saying something so questionable, would they? Oh no. Okay, right, where next? God, this Raw had a lot of angles. Heyman and The Vision, they opened the show. Paul cut a promo really angry with Seth Rollins because at Elimination Chamber, Seth, of course, cost Logan Paul his space at WrestleMania, his title shot, because he cost him in the Chamber match. So Heyman's cutting this promo in the ring, flanked by Logan and by Austin Theory as well. And there they are, The Vision, opening the show with a heel promo. And then the other two lads are lured away from Paul. They're lured away from the ring because one by one, two masked men come out, right? And then Logan Paul goes after one of them, chasing him through the crowd. Austin Theory goes after the other one. And now Heyman's all alone in the ring. And then a third masked man comes down the ramp. Oh, that's got to be Rollins, right? And I found this a bit unintentionally hilarious because then we got a close-up on the masked man, and from the bits of his face we could see, it obviously wasn't Seth Rollins, and Heyman was like, oh my God, no, not you again. But after Heyman's very melodramatic reaction at Elimination Chamber, I don't know what to think of him anymore as a character. Maybe he's quite simply lost his mind recently. Anyway, the third guy wasn't Rollins, obviously, because it didn't look like him. And the real Rollins sneaked into the ring from behind. Chair shot to the back. Stompy, stompy, stomp. Take that, Paul. Now, I explained in my last video how the mask reveal at Elimination Chamber wasn't really doing it for me at all. Not because I didn't agree with Seth being the man in the mask, because I think that was the only kind of solution they could have really gone with in the end. That was the only thing that ultimately made sense, really. But it wasn't that made me annoyed at the whole reveal. It was the reception that WWE gave it and the way they kind of expected us as the audience to feel. Because remember Heyman being like, oh my God, and the announce team being like, oh my God. I mean, this was only like 2 days ago. I don't know why I'm so... You remember this too, right? What I'm saying is they treated it like it was the craziest swerve of all time when it was the most obvious way to go. I don't mind the way it went. It was the tone that I hated. Anyway, what I didn't hate was the attack here on Heyman. Because Paul, like any good heel manager, runs his mouth so much and skirts with danger so much, gets threatened quite a lot, that on the occasion when he actually does get some physical comeuppance, it's usually like really satisfying because it doesn't happen all that often. I don't know where we go from here, because this feels like it was going to lead to Seth versus the Vision at Mania. That's what I'd assumed, or versus some combination of the Vision at Mania. But now it looks like it could be the Usos versus the Vision at Mania. Or maybe they'll get that out of the way before WrestleMania? I don't quite know yet. Basically, that's because the Usos then got involved in this thread throughout the show. We got, first of all, we got a charming addition to WWE's wonderful history of superstar pops up unexpectedly driving a vehicle that they're not supposed to be driving, with LA Knight materializing in the driver's seat of Paul Heyman's ambulance and like screeching away, saying, I'll take good care of him, lads. It's classic, it's classic babyface. It's Stone Cold Steve Austin stuff. Although when it's a heel, as I've demonstrated there with some of the images, I think, then it's The Undertaker who does it best. But when it's a face doing it, oh, that's Stone Cold. But anyway, the reason that Usos got involved is because LA Knight managed to pull off these shenanigans with the help of Jimmy Uso, who fought off the Vision while it was all going on, and then later in the night was booked in a match against Austin Theory. Less of a wrestling match, really, more of an excuse for the Vision to beat Jimmy down until his brother Jay made the save, and they sent the heels packing and posed all happy and stuff. That's why I think it might be the Usos defending those tag belts against the Vision at Mania. But maybe they'll lose the tag belts to the Vision, and the Vision will carry them into Mania against Rollins and like an ally. I don't know who yet, but somebody. And what becomes of Paul Heyman now that LA Knight's got his hands on him? Did he just take him to hospital faster than would have been comfortable? Or is he going to actually turn up with him next week and there's going to be kind of sinister stuff going on, like a real abduction? I don't know. That's the beauty of modern WWE, because there's so many questions and only some of them get answered. You want more unhinged behaviour on this week's episode of Raw, you say? Yes, there was still some more to talk about. I don't know if unhinged is the correct word anymore, but certainly special things that only seem to happen once in a while on Raw, and they kind of threw them all in this episode. So first of all, we got a luchador unmasking, very briefly, but it definitely still happened, as Gunther unmasked Dragon Lee towards the end of their match. Basically, Gunther had him in a sleeper hold, whipped the mask off, reapplied the sleeper instantly, and Dragon Lee was forced to tap out. The thing I like about this is that Gunther could have easily beaten Dragon Lee without having to resort to unmasking a luchador, the worst thing you can do to a luchador, but it's Gunther, and he's a horrible heel, and he just wanted to. That works really well. Gunther's like the best heel in WWE right now, right? Yeah. Like, I'm going to need the Ring General to get a big featured match at WrestleMania, definitely. And I'm probably going to need him to win that match as well. Unless it's against someone like Obafemi or whoever, you know. But I would take Gunther winning over most people on the current roster. So yeah, just a casual unmasking of a luchador on a weekly episode of Raw. It is worth mentioning that maybe they caught more of Dragon Lee's face than they initially intended to. But he was wearing a bit of face paint, so hopefully that, you couldn't really make out his features too well. So really not a good night for Dragon Lee. But a luchador who had a very good night was Penta, winning his first title in WWE, defeating Dominic Mysterio for the IC belt. I like this for two reasons. One, it manages to advance two storylines simultaneously. Always very nice, always very deft when that happens. The story of Penta's success in WWE, winning his first gold and everything. And also the story of Descent within the Judgment Day, Dom and Balor, because Finn Balor at the minute is looking increasingly like a babyface. He shook CM Punk's hand after their match at Elimination Chamber. Shook. He shooketh. They showed sportsmanship to each other. And then also Balor prevented JD McDonough from interfering in this match to help Dom retain, and Dom lost the belt. So that's the first reason I like it. It handles two things at once. The second reason I like it is because it also incorporates Danhausen into things in quite an effective way, which I did not see coming after his mixed response when debuting at the pay-per-view. Basically what happened here was Danhausen met the Judgment Day backstage before Dom's match, and they were rude to him, so he cursed Dominic. And wouldn't you know it, Dom lost his gold. So there we go. I quite like that. Danhausen curses someone who deserves it, and then a bad thing happens to them. That's all right, that. Hey, look, not all the storylines I like have to be really ambitious and complex, okay? And speaking of Judgment Day members, or a former one in particular, Rhea Ripley made an appearance alongside Io Sky, but that was kind of to hype her match with Jade Cargill at WrestleMania, but the meat of that build is going to presumably take place on SmackDown, and this was just kind of hyping Rhea's appearance on the blue brand. So we didn't learn that much in that regard. This is a feud that's going to get built on SmackDown. And built on social media as well, apparently, judging by the number of tweets that were flying around over the past day or so. What on earth is going on? Tension popping off on social media, not just between Rhea and Jade, the two women having an actual match at WrestleMania, but uninvolved parties as well. And obviously the debate always rages when something like this happens online, like, is it a work, is it a shoot? People calling each other idiots, regardless of which side of the fence you lie on. And I know that being worked is basically poison to a content creator like myself. So I really should stay out of this and not guess whether it's a work or a shoot. But I'm going to stick my neck out. I think this is real. Like I've seen many people point out on Reddit and on Twitter and stuff, if this was all part of a storyline and it was deliberate by WWE, why would they tell Piper Niven, of all people, to get involved when she is, sadly at the moment, still very much sidelined with injury? So I think this is real. I think this is real beef. I'd happily be proven wrong, of course, but I think it's real. I just don't know why. I mean, there's all sorts of tensions that probably go on behind the scenes that 99% of get resolved before they ever see the public eye, but I wonder what this one's about. Because is it that Rhea's going to win and take the belt from Jade at Mania? And Jay's not happy about that? I don't know. It could just be that Danhausen has cursed the SmackDown women's division, specifically around the time of WrestleMania, as proven by last year with the Charlotte Flair and Tiffany Stratton stuff. Very, very strange. Maybe they can use it. Maybe they can channel this, I think, real-life tension into a good feud for Mania. Anyway, yeah, hectic Raw. We had kind of normal stuff as well. Stuff that you would more typically expect on a weekly TV episode. We had AJ Lee cutting a promo where she vowed to be a fighting champion now that she's the women's IC champion. We had a continuation of the Americano verse, of course, and we had a brawl between two big lads. And I like when two big lads brawl on the wrestling. This time it was Obafemi and Rusev, just two big lads punching and brawling to set up a match next week, which I am very much looking forward to, of course. But I think we can all agree that the amount of insane stuff on this week's Raw kind of vastly outweighs the normal stuff. And good. Because if you're struggling creatively and you're in a rut and you can't book good all the time, just book crazy. And that'll work. To a point. Now, do I think this Raw that I've just talked about, do I think that represents a huge turning point on the road to WrestleMania, and now Mania 42 is going to be an absolute all-timer, despite the build being quite lackluster so far? No, I don't quite think that necessarily. We've still got the SmackDown side of the equation to worry about, of course, after all. Who knows how that'll go. And we've also got still like 6 weeks of build left to go until Mania itself, a time in which, you know, any number of things could feasibly still go wrong. However, I do feel like more stuff just happened on this week's episode of Raw, and it felt like more of it mattered than usual. And that's definitely a step in the right direction. I'm all in favour of that. Maybe not the Liv Morgan comment. Maybe not that bit. I'm not in favour of that sort of stuff. But most of it, yeah, man. Because in this tightly controlled world of modern wrestling, I think it's really easy to forget sometimes that these writers, these bookers, could try way more things than we usually get treated to. They could be way more ambitious and way more experimental. And we don't really get that. We get quite a conservative product these days. Not this week, though. I mean, the pace, like I say, the pace was still very slow and all the ads and not quite enough wrestling for my liking. But in terms of the other stuff, yeah, much improved, I think. And especially at this time of year with WrestleMania looming as well. Definitely a step in the right direction. Thank you very much for watching this video. Do leave your thoughts and opinions in the comment section down below. Please like, share and subscribe to the video, of course, as well if you want. Check out my Patreon if you wish to. There'll be a link to that in the description as well. And thank you once again for watching. I've been Jack the Jobber, and I'll see you further down the road to WrestleMania, brothers.